Mars hour and the midheaven is separating from Chiron moon. Mars is still 22ing. Ascendant ruled by Sun in the 8th house in Pisces. Um, Two things came about. One was regarding the naming, and but I'll talk about the first one because Aries is a very action-oriented sign, and I kind of feel that the motivation for behind the action of Aries is self-assertion or self-expression. Okay? Aries competes not with others but with itself. For example, when I upload a podcast, I don't think if I'm better or worse than, let's say, my colleagues. I just try to think about what is the value that I bring that is adding to the value that I brought before. Okay, and in that sense, if I would think about, let's say, comparison, it wouldn't be about who is better or who is worse. It would be about, oh, wait a second. Oh, that person addressed that from that perspective, which really shows of how their own identity shows up in their craft, whereas I approach that instinctively from my perspective that is very different, and also the way that I express myself is very different. Okay, because Aries is really way more busy with the I am. Now, in terms of actions, Aries is result oriented. Neptune in Aries can give us a little bit more of, I think about it when I never really embarked into the hardcore film industry because that would necessitate me rubbing shoulders with the Epsteins. And fortunately, for other reasons, I just couldn't communicate. I had difficulty to make like calls and so on and so forth. Um, so yeah, it was difficult. Even today, communication is still difficult for me. I have Chiron in Gemini, which is Mercury is a speech sign. So um, it's both the curation and the wound. And this is where, with filmmaking, I knew that we take action and it's almost an unconditional love because we don't know what will come out of that, if ever. So the form of creation was really a form of expression of unconditional love to the craft. However, with Aries, with Neptune Aries, we do have that. Yet, and the results that Aries is oriented towards is either self-determination, sovereignty, individuation, or something that really expresses ourselves. If I think of it, I have a second house Aries, and when I began to work on my business, my thinking was, okay, I'm doing that for my own growth, because back then I wasn't even making, like, the money that I would be making would not even come to me because I was in debt at the time. And so it was really this form of unconditional love towards my craft that decided to take a step towards independence and financial um, sovereignty, which consequently led me to understand what is actually blocking. Okay, but I feel that this is going to be a thing that is going to make it very difficult for um, oriented actions that don't have self-determination, that honors the self-determination of others in their strategy, natally or natively. Now, the second thing is, and I can only speak about the community, like the more local to Israel community. And here is the thing, amongst orthodoxies, a girl that is dressed like normal, not with a tent, um, sometimes they would call her names, whether it's Spritze or Sharmuta or I don't know, um, something or whore, something of that sort. And I was just thinking about my previous video and how when the Jews were exiled, they were called Jude. And I'm like, damn. Like the lack of self awareness of the community. Like, do they really need to be in exile and being called Jude to to sovereign up? I mean, so I'm sure that each community has its own, by the way, not just Orthodox, has its own version of that, but it's really how the name calling with persecution is really, it's kind of like to those that haven't integrated that notion around identity. um, they're gonna be met with, first of all, exile and persecution as societies, and secondly, they probably will not like the way that they are being defined or named in those situations. Now, it's one thing to be in exile. Okay, for example, Maimonides developed the pillars of Jewish philosophy and medicine in exile. He affected Sufi thinking and was affected by Sufi thinking. Um, but other people have different experience in exile. And if they think back to how they name called people in their own communities that were simply having their own sense of self, that's, usually it's so funny. The women they call whores are usually the women that say no the most. For example, when Feynman was trying those cult-like techniques of hitting with women after the death of his first wife, he was not power abusing in the usual sense because he was pretending to be a student. So he was not applying to authority, but he was taught cult-like. He was basically cult-like. It's to create trauma bond. And being a physicist, I think he didn't understand the psychological implication of that on his life energy and others, or who would that be working with. Um, those are, by the way, methods to assassinate because it would play to extortion cults. But when ladies would tell him no, he would say that they are worse than a whore. Hmm. Now, I think with all of those genderic gender wars, um, there is some sort of like a really grim reality where the way they named the women, or if it is secret society, the boys, is there's some sort of events that are going to be with naming upon mass death in exile. Now, the tender version of this is where, you know, some people there would be war, and then some people would run away to another country, and then if they continue to misbehave to women and children as they did, it's kind of like the authentic people of the society they immigrated to would say, well, this is bad, and what's happening within our society when our people go outside, um, basically is also bad. But for those who are not so exposed or not so aware, it's going to be like, well, they ran away from their countries and they're doing the same things that they did. So this is something that really came about, that sometimes until people are not lined up to the death as groups of naked men and women and children, strip off their human dignity and called Jude, they don't realize that that person who simply had a sense of self and said no and was persecuted, tortured for it, is not a whore, is just a human being that doesn't comply with holocausts.